Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the ongoing Afghan peace process, about the current development, and we'll be talking about now, since the Afghan peace talks will be held in Moscow on March 18th, and that is just around the corner. And let's see what sort of developments we get to witness out there. But later on, Turkey to host Afghan Peace Conference in April 2021 after this. So next couple of weeks would be really important. So talking about today's issue, we'll be talking about the Taliban, and as we all know that they have agreed to attend the Afghan peace talks in Moscow. A high-level delegation of 10 members of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, led by the Taliban co-founder Mullah Brother Akhund, will attend the meeting held in Moscow on March 18th. At the same time, it further states that if we withdraw and no deal was made with the Taliban, I think the government of Afghanistan is going to be in for a very stiff fight to retain possession of towns and cities, stated by the commander of US Central Command, General Kenneth McKenzie. Furthermore, Pakistan's Special Envoy in Afghanistan, Ambassador Mohammad Sadiq, traveled to Iran and held talks with Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif to discuss the future of Afghan peace process. And the United States currently has 3,500 troops in Afghanistan, 1,000 more than the declared total of 2,500. This report was published in New York Times. And last but not least, the scope of the US presence has become a contentious issue in Afghanistan, where the Taliban want the Americans gone, while the government's beleaguered security forces rely on US air support. Report again was published in the New York Times. And as we all know that there was this letter sent to the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, in which the Americans very categorically stated that now he needs to make sure that whatever process is taking place should be meaningful. And at the same time, having said that, since there is a lot of issues among the government and the Taliban. Now again, there was this interesting formula of power sharing was also discussed. And then other than that, if they believe that if they just leave like that, the Taliban will take over and a civil war like situation would be there in place in Afghanistan. So that is something which they do not want. What sort of a role Pakistan can play? The regional players like Russia, China or Iran can play. We'll be throwing light on that aspect as well. So talk about this, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio, on my right is Dr. AQAB Malik Sahab. He is an expert on foreign affairs and international relations. Thank you very much, AQAB Malik, for your time, sir.
Thank you.
And we have with us Air Commodore retired Iftikhar Bajwa Sahab. He's a senior analyst. Thank you so much, sir, for your time as well. AQAB Malik Sahab, about a week ago, there was the story that a letter was sent by the Americans to the Afghan president. And they have emphasized that the Afghan president should gear up and should follow certain instructions, especially when you're talking about the confidence-building measures. Unfortunately, the major bone of contention, as we all know, was about the release of prisoner, and there was this misunderstanding perhaps, and later on about the number of people. Because as far as Taliban is concerned, as we all know, they do not have any sort of game plan beyond the borders of Afghanistan. They just want the foreign troops to vacate as soon as possible. But after the Joe Biden administration, as we all know, it seems it is not possible to leave Afghanistan in May, and especially when there is this third wave of coronavirus in place. Your take.
Well, I don't think the Americans are going to leave anytime soon. You've got to understand that they've got a lot of pressure in the United States to leave after a virtually 20-year war, which is no real outcome as far as they're concerned. The Afghan government has changed. A lot of dynamics have changed for the minorities in the north, for example, and certain vested parties who signed and allied with the US to oppose the Taliban. Dynamics have changed compared to the 1990s, when Taliban took over power and 95% of the country in real terms. That's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen again. The northern areas dominated by the ethnic minorities like the Hazaras and the Uzbeks and Tajiks are very strong in their own areas. They're not going to give that up. And that, I don't think, is an issue with the Taliban either. I think the Taliban are going to try to seek their home ground more importantly than anything else, where all majority Pashtun population is. That being said, the president is a Pashtun, and he has linkages everywhere. It's going to be a hard fight for him primarily. I think the Taliban will have to come to a compromise. It's a negotiation at the end of the day. It's always been a negotiation for land and future power sharing. The Taliban recognizes that there will be future power sharing, and I think there's an understanding with the United States there as well. Although the Taliban has always, since the beginning, said that the United States and all foreign troops must leave. That being said, what would happen is that the Taliban in a very strong position. They negotiate through power. They negotiate through violence.
Yeah.
And they will commit more violent actions, and even to the extent that will go on to more combat-driven actions rather than terrorist actions, to face off against the National Afghan Army, which I don't think will be fit enough to take them on. It's a bit like the late 1970s and the communist coup, and how everything fell apart, you know, as far as Mujahideen were concerned. And then the 80s, when the communists were back and after the Russians had left, and they took power, the Russians had left. And they held power for a few years, but it was inevitable that they were going to fall against Mujahideen. A similar dynamic, but I think there's going to be more negotiation in the respect. And this violence that will occur, most likely than not, is more a contention of level and leverage of power, to how much stakes each particular party and interest they have in the future of Afghanistan and how they can negotiate a stronger hand in the future power sharing. I mean, that's inevitable. I think the Taliban has learned to accept that. But they want more than what they've got. And they want a real stake and real positions of power to govern Afghanistan in the future. That's going to be the main negotiation, and that depends on how the northern
the question
areas
is whether the
dictate
Taliban, they have the capacity to deliver even if they come into power. Now, Ekamat has up a couple of points. One is that the Taliban were very clearly told that there should be no violence. There should be a proper ceasefire, forget about the spring offensive, and negotiate so that, you know, you can pay way for that, for proper talks and all. At the same time, sir, the American government has also, in fact, very strictly said to the Afghan president that you also need to behave and, you know, compromise on certain areas. And, you know, when you talk about some sort of a compromise, doesn't mean that you give in, but at least don't be too stiff. Now, sir, there are two important areas. One is about the role of the Taliban through violence, because they want to dictate the terms and the conditions by showing their power, their strength on ground. And at the same time, they also want to give an impression to the Americans that, see, this puppet regime, without your support or help, cannot even sustain for a week. So it's us. But sir, the ground reality is that even whenever the voting takes place, interestingly, it has a very different mixed dynamics. Taliban perhaps on ground do not have that kind of a support through voter. How do you see this equation?
First of all, I think the peace process, they have come a long way from guns to tables, and they've been negotiating, I would say, from a position of strength, and they like to continue to negotiate their terms from a very good position of strength. At the same time, we can't analyze that they have been stuck to what they've been earlier saying. They have given some space and they have been compromising to some extent to that pressure that they were put in. However, their strategy of guns and fight, that they like to continue, and they like to negotiate anything. And they are right in saying that the puppet regime cannot sustain for even a couple of weeks or even for days, as long as they are not backed by the international powers.
So primarily, sir, you believe that the Americans, they would be vacating within the time earlier stated by the former President Donald Trump, because Dr. AQAB believes that this is not going to be possible. But sir, at the same time, Mr. Blinken, the Secretary of State, also hinted that this option could still be in place?
I would agree with my co-panelist that there is comparatively a very less chance of Americans vacating or going out of Afghanistan anytime soon. I think that deadline will have to be either extended, one, or there will be some other negotiated terms that parties will have to settle through. But looking at the recent events, all the parties, they appear to be very serious in settling the issue, including Taliban. They all like to, they have an understanding that as long as they settle the issue and they come to terms for a peaceful settlement, they cannot move forward. So I think this is the best thing with all the stakeholders, that they like to settle the issue. So I'm optimistic that though it is not like, I don't think that Americans would leave anytime soon, but at the same time, the peace process would continue and there would be some optimistic result of the peace process.
But sir, having said that, last quick comment, since the Taliban do not believe in any foreign element being involved in the decision making as far as Afghanistan is concerned, but unfortunately, sir, they live on American dollars. I mean, if there is no support even for a month or two, you exactly know what is going to happen out there. They can't even pay the, the salaries of the people working in various departments, the government departments. Now, sir, that role needs to be either replaced or it has to be continued by the Americans, sir, which most likely they might not. Afghanistan, do you think, sir, is a country that can achieve a certain level of stability where at least we see that there is no violence of the current level, sir? At least there's some sort of an equation that is sorted out. And the three major stakeholders, I'm going to talk about the non-state actors, but sir, Taliban. Number two is the current government, sir. Whether you talk about Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah. Another very important factor is about the warlords and the public. How do you see this? Do you think they can come on one page, sir, or no?
There's always a possibility. Actually, Taliban, they had been, since quite some time, they have been diversifying their terms and their negotiating partners. They have been in touch with, say, Pakistan is definitely their close associate in that sense that we are neighbors and they have been talking to us. They have been through with these negotiations with China, Qatar, Iran, and many more countries. So they've been on a policy of, I would say, diversification when it comes to settling for any of the deal. So they've been always going to those tables or those deals that wherever they were invited. So this is a positive sign. Having said this, sustainability of Afghanistan on their domestic economy is not possible in near future.
Mm-hmm. There is no economy as such.
There is no economy as such. And 60 to 70% according to statistics is given to them by the foreign aid. And majority of the aid comes from United States. Russia, China, and many other partners, they don't want to, they're not giving them the sort of aid Americans are giving Afghanistan. And Taliban are cognizant of the fact that they won't be able to sustain. So this is one position of strength for the Americans to bring Taliban to some position of negotiation. On the other side, Taliban have their own strength on ground that they hold a very big area in Afghanistan where they can implement their policy by some coercive action. So both sides, they have some good points to negotiate.
All right, sir. So we've been joined in by Rahimullah Yusufzai Saab, sir, senior journalist from KP. Assalamu alaikum ji.
Walaikum salam.
Yusufzai Saab, thank you so much for taking out your time and talking to PTV World. Now, tell us, sir, what's the latest update? What's going on? Now we are hearing that the talks will take place in Moscow on the 18th, and then next month, after about 4 weeks, another round of talks will be held in Turkey also. How do you see these two major developments?
I think this shows that the peace initiative actually is gaining strength, gaining momentum. This is the new U.S. initiative along with the Russian initiative. The Russian one actually has been overtaken by events. They were doing it earlier, but now, because of the American new proposals, I think the Moscow meeting has lost its advantage. Or, for practical purposes, it won't make much of an impact. I think the real, meetings or conferences which can make a difference will be the one in Istanbul, the intra-Afghan, meeting, and also the one that will be sponsored by the UN. I think that apart from that, we'll be seeing the Americans applying pressure on the Afghan government and also Taliban to make them agree on at least certain issues regarding the peace process. So I think this is a season of conferences. This is, a season of new peace initiatives. This also shows that how difficult it is to make Afghanistan peaceful again. So many efforts are being put into this, exercise, but still, it's not really creating many hopes that this issue can be finally resolved.
Now, you raised up a couple of points here. One is about the letter written to the Afghan president, and very categorically it was mentioned that he needs to cooperate. And at the same time, the Taliban were also told that they need to cooperate as well. Now, when you talk about these two different mindsets, sir, working together, and again, Taliban adopting a very different strategy, whereas we have seen during the last two terms of Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah, both were in power at the same time. They could not deliver, sir. Should we expect something out of these two characters, or you think there is going to be a regime change, a transitional government perhaps, or some sort of a settlement of, of various groups coming into power and sharing, the platform?
I think if the Taliban agree, that transitional government can be formed, then Ashraf Ghani's opposition will not really count. He will succumb to the American pressure because the U.S. is the biggest economic and military, supporter of the Afghan government. And without the American support, I don't think the Afghan government, can sustain itself. Ashraf Ghani himself has conceded that if there is no international support for his security forces for 6 months, then his army will collapse. And the collapse of the army means the collapse of the government. So I think that first the Americans have to persuade the Taliban to agree to the formation of a transitional government. Until now, they actually have not come up formally, officially, with their reaction to the American proposals. But the spokesman said that transitional governments have not really worked in Afghanistan in the past. He doesn't think it can deliver now. But I think that's not the official, viewpoint yet, because he also added that Taliban leadership is still, considering these proposals. They already decided to attend these conferences. They are sending a 10-member delegation to Moscow, led by Mullah Biradar. And they will also attend the meeting in Turkey. But I think they will not like the Doha process to be replaced by the Istanbul process.
All right. So last comment.
Negotiating with whoever in Doha and not in Istanbul or Turkey. So I think that the Ashraf Ghani government and Taliban, yes, we know they have deep, mistrust, and also there is such a wide gulf that it won't be easy. But I think, what are the other alternatives then? Because we need a transitional government in Afghanistan to be able to, resolve some of the issues, and also the Taliban will not, partner Ashraf Ghani to form an interim government. They would like to have an interim government which does not have Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah or, these kind of people. So I think that's the way. that has to be followed. And I believe eventually Taliban will agree to a transitional government which does not include Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah.
But Ashraf Ghani, sir, very clearly mentions that he is somebody who's very important. He cannot be, sidelined. But at the same time, the Americans do believe that he is very rigid and he has to show some sort of flexibility, sir. Do you think Ashraf Ghani would do that?
I think if you look at his track record, he also opposed certain other decisions taken by Trump, especially the peace talks with Taliban in the absence of the Afghan government, and then the American willingness agreement with Taliban in February last year to release Taliban prisoners. So these were decisions taken without Ashraf Ghani's agreement or participation, and he was opposed to the release of Taliban prisoners. But eventually, he had to do that because there was so much of American pressure. The Americans only announced. I remember Mike Pompeo saying that we will not give $1 billion for that particular year, and then we will not give another $1 billion the next year. And that pressure worked. And Ashraf Ghani then found a way out. He called the Al-Wajirga and got this agreement to release the Taliban prisoners. So I think that, he may say brave words, he may use brave words, but I think eventually he knows his limitations and he has to agree to the American proposal. But the big issue is whether Taliban will also agree to these American proposals.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for your comments. Yusuf Saab. Now, sir, there's another story in the paper, and that says that the US has more troops. Earlier, the number I'm not talking about the NATO troops, I'm just talking about the US troops. The number was 2,500, that is what we were told. Now they say there are 3,500 and additional 1,000. So are these the contractors? Because a lot of people believe that, forget about the men in uniform, the contractors, they are in thousands. And as long as they are there, sir, there could be no peace. How do you see that aspect, sir?
Well, contractors are purely business orientated. They're going to get contracts from the US government and other governments, maybe like the European Union and other parties, to sustain themselves. Once that money dries out, they're private enterprises, so they're likely to leave. However, they're a pressure point as well. They're a pressure group on maintenance of a certain degree of American presence in Afghanistan without it being official. But that would also depend on what the Afghan government wants at that particular time. Obviously, the Taliban does not want that. But I want to take it to another point. I mean, these contracts, these are small issues, really. 1,000 troops doesn't really make a difference at all. You look at how large that country is. It's just a very minor point. It's a sole point because it's actually, as far as Taliban are concerned, a foreign presence, even if it's one person. So they want them out, all out. And that's been what they've wanted all along. That being done, if that happens, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but if that happens, I think the Taliban will come to a certain degree of understanding that they're going to acquire as much as they can, and then they're going to be able to compromise with the opposing forces, that they are what we call the Afghan government. But basically, which is various different parties that are in a coalition together, to oppose Taliban. That's all it is. And they're all got their own particular power centers, and they're in opposition with each other in many ways as well. So they could very easily fracture and fight with each other within themselves. So the contractors is a non-issue. I don't think it's a big issue. It's a nice highlighting issue
earlier,
for a newspaper, but
it was
but it's not going to have an impact.
even if you talk about Iraq, we have seen or heard
thousands and thousands.
Thousands of these.
They earn a lot of money there.
Sir, you're talking about billions
And
of
they're
dollars.
ex-military anyway.
Exactly. And sir, when you talk about this number, let's suppose 3,000, 3,500, whatever the number is, as you mentioned that 1,000 doesn't make a difference, but let's suppose if 150,000 couldn't do anything, this 1,000 doesn't matter. But sir, having said that, now the point is that when you talk about a certain number, let's suppose if they vacate, if they leave America, if they leave Afghanistan and go back to America, but sir, the general perception about the embassies all over the world, the American embassies I'm talking about, they are the biggest. Look at Pakistan for that matter, so right in front of you. And the number of staff, that's always the highest in the world, sir. Whether you talk about Pakistan or even Afghanistan, because they have actually built bomb-proof castles there, sir.
Why is that? It's
That
pretty
is what.
obvious. It's
So
pretty obvious.
that's exactly supports your argument that they are not there to leave.
I personally, people don't agree with me.
So,
People argue against me.
the action.
I think it's a
and
it's a
even
mistake.
another support, which actually really gives kick to your idea, and that comes from none other than the Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg. And he, even before Mr. Blinken issued a statement, he said that no, sir, this is not possible, this is not going to happen. So NATO, after Biden coming into power, they're like this now. Forget about the kind of relationship NATO had earlier with Mr. Donald Trump.
Let's look at the bigger
Things would change. Things
Let's look
have
at-
changed.
Let's look at the bigger picture. I'm always about the bigger picture. Look at where Afghanistan is situated. It is absolutely in the most strategic position in Asia. You have the Russians, Central Asia, China, Iran,
Out of Asia,
Pakistan,
as they call it.
but that's what it's always been. The fact of the matter is, and any strategist would obviously say that it is a strategic mistake to leave Afghanistan now. Given that new Cold War has started already, and it's running very heavily now, vis-a-vis the Americans, vis-a-vis the Chinese and the Russians. The Chinese and Russians are now declaring a new space race with establishment of a moon base, a joint moon base. I mean, this is something else that's happening. Afghanistan is right in the right position for any occupying power. Why would, I mean, it doesn't make sense for me to think that the Americans would actually give it up. It
Now,
will
do you
not.
think in the third decade of the current century, this is going to be a strategic objective of the Americans to stay there? Because they want to contain China. And when you talk about the OBOR or the Chinese expansion plan, as the Americans call it, that presence is going to put a check on them.
Well, Afghanistan is just one little point in the big map. It is a significant point, but it's one point that you don't want to give up. It depends when you play chess. Sometimes you allow your pawn to be killed, or even a knight or a castle, to be able to take a strategic advantage on a much more important matter, a strategic issue. That could happen. They will every country that is a large power, for example, China or the Russians, will sacrifice another power that they're allied to for many years if it's a strategic advantage for them. The same with the Americans. It's not unbelievable, and that's how you win. And this is about global power. Who's going to control the world order in the forthcoming decades? And the Americans want to retain that control. And I hear a lot of people in Pakistan say, China is coming. But hold on one second. China and Russia, fine. Russia economically, not there. China, maybe. But China's just alone. You have many Western countries, many economic powers. It's not just the United States alone. They have a philosophy together. They have a particular understanding on how to rule the world, you could say, or allow it to run a particular system. They don't want to disrupt that. So they're going to band together in order to stop any change from happening. Afghanistan is just one contentious point. It's a small little pinprick in the larger picture of geostrategic affairs between these countries. America may give it up, but it's unlikely. I don't think it's something that they would throw away. They may co-opt the Taliban. I mean, that's a likelihood. They co-opt the Taliban to fight against the atheists, as far as they can see, because the Americans are known and to the Taliban to still be Christian, as opposed to the Chinese and maybe even the Russians. So you can utilize, I mean, that's just a tool to utilize, an instrument, religion is, as far as the Americans are concerned, to utilize the Taliban in order to not allow the Chinese in, for example. But if the Americans left, what would happen to the rare earth minerals, trillions of dollars worth, which China controls 95% of the world's resources, of future technology, in other words, the basic elements that are required for these high-tech and high-end electronics which will dictate terms as far as the way the
You're
world
already
develops.
doing that, yeah?
And they're doing that. So why would the Americans give up those trillions of dollars worth of not just income, but access to resources that they need to maintain power in the future?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. So I think it's more a facade than
All
anything
right.
else.
All right. Now, Ekam Rasab, a couple of other important areas. One is regarding the external spoilers. You know, whenever Pakistan was close to breakthrough, you know, as far as the Afghan peace process is concerned, Indians would always make sure that something wrong goes. Something wrong happens, and eventually you talk about the Mahri process, sir. And then we all thought it got derailed, the entire process regarding the Afghan peace. We got to know that Mullah Muhammad Umar's story came out. Now again, sir, we all felt that Indians were sidelined, but they are not, sir. Because if somebody, in fact, calls the Pakistani decision makers or visits Zalme Khalilzad for that matter, but at the same time, a call goes from the same person to Mr. Jaishankar.
Correct.
Now, this is one area. And secondly, sir, Pakistan has been very categorically open about it. And we have said there are non-state actors, whether you talk about the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, you talk about Daesh, you talk about ISIS, you talk about even if there are certain splinter groups of Al-Qaeda, you talk about Sharia Massoud group, you talk about Saifullah group, I mean, there's a long list, sir. Now, they have a lot of presence, sir, and they are surviving there. But they have an ideological conflict with the Taliban. So how do you see that, sir? Do you think this could be sorted out earlier at some stage, sir, or you think this could be the real factor that could eventually derail the whole process of talks or settlement, perhaps?
I would say one thing, that the spoilers or those who did not want the peace to take place in the region, they had been effective in the past, but their effectiveness has reduced with the passage of time. All the stakeholders in Afghanistan appear to be very convinced in peace, and they have started to bank less on those spoilers, what we call them, and all of them appear to be very concerned with the peace because they have had enough of instability and bloodshed in Afghanistan, and parties appear to be like very concerned with the initiative and they like to have peace. That is one. Secondly, when it comes to, say, China or other parties, I don't think America would leave Afghanistan the way maybe they propagate, the way we, majority of us, think. They would leave in one way and they would be there in another way. Like you said, that contractors, there's a very thin line difference between boots on ground or troops on ground and employees or contractors or the embassy employees. They have, they will like to have their presence, and looking at the what we understand the geostrategic position, and to look closely at China, looking at their BRI thing, which is so
send a
huge.
few thousand contractors and give them the diplomatic status.
Status.
What would the Taliban say then?
Exactly. So we should not assume that they would leave the way we think that they would leave. They would continue to be there in some shape, and the best shape would be that they would be there through these contractors. And China has they have a diplomacy of dollars, and China has a diplomacy of, I would say, infrastructure in a very
Development.
China has been very successful in most of the African countries where it developed infrastructure, and some amount of stability have come in those war-torn regions in Africa. So they have a very effective tool of diplomacy through development. And they have also started to refrain from what we used to call them, they have a debt trap diplomacy. Maybe we said that, and they did that to an extent, and they actually have stopped that.
This
So
debt trap concept, sir, primarily it's a Western-generated, I would say...
a concoction.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I won't call it a concoction, there's certain reality there, but it is emphasized extra.
So
Exaggerate.
China would stay effective, and to counter China, there's all the likelihood that Americans will have their presence in some shape, even if the so-called troops are like withdrawn. The troops are in very different categories. They're contractors, they're troops, they're the very...
Sir, in case of a withdrawal and in case of a no withdrawal, what's the future of these non-state actors like Daesh and all these, sir? Because they are posing a direct threat to Pakistan, sir.
They are, but when it comes to Afghans, as Afghans, all those parties, I would say, they are hell of negotiators. They know the knack of coming to terms when it comes to that basic agreement that they like to come to terms. In my personal analysis, they appear to have come to those terms that they like to have that peace. They all appear to be very convinced. They will be having their vested interests, of course, and they will be trying to pursue their vested interests. But Afghans as a majority, they appear to be very concerned about the peace.
Dr. AQAB, there was this recent kind of a meeting or a conversation between the members. You talk about India and USA in particular, and later on among the overall members of Quad. Australia, Japan, India and USA. Now these four allies are there. Whatever the purpose is, that is a separate chapter. But sir, the role of India, I was reading an article that India has become the fourth largest, in terms of keeping the foreign reserves. They have crossed Russia. So that tells us about whatever we claim, whatever we say, that's a separate story. But at the end of the day, money matters. Money makes the mayor go, as they say. Now the point is, sir, that the American support and the cooperation with the Indians obviously would lead them to have a better, perhaps a greater role in Afghanistan. Whether they deserve it or they don't, that's a separate issue. But they will have, sir. They would like to. Why wouldn't this character, what's his name, the National Security Advisor of India, Ajit Doval, or Amit Mishra, or Mr. Jaishankar, or Modi for that matter, sir? These are the major decision makers there. And they want Afghanistan to be like this for perhaps another 30, 40 years because that suits them. They can have an indirect sort of, attack through the Afghan soil on us. And this is what exactly they've been doing, bleeding Pakistan slowly but surely.
Well, there's no doubt about that. It's in their interest to destabilize Pakistan to an extent and to use every avenue possible to undermine Pakistan. And that would include what we call the Pakistani Taliban, Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan, that were pushed out into Afghanistan. But they're looking at a bigger picture there as well. I think all parties, the biggest problem with peace in Afghanistan is that there's so many parties inside and there's so many parties outside who support the many parties inside in various different ways, who want to maintain their own interests and undermine every other party with what they do from the parties outside. So it's a big mess. It is a big mess. And they can continue to do that until all the parties outside say, we've had enough, and we leave it alone. But the reality is that that's not going to happen because Afghanistan is so important in that area. So India is going to continue. Let's not kid ourselves. Nobody's innocent here. This is not a moralistic point of view that who's right and wrong. India will pursue its own interests, as will every other country or every party in that respect. So we can be moralistic about it and say that's not right and that's wrong. But the fact of the matter is, it's just the way the world has evolved, and this is how they play strategy. And this is how they're going to get ahead, to undermine their opponent. And it's been happening in India for thousands of years. So nothing's going to change in that respect, as far as Afghanistan is concerned. I think it's a fantasy to think that they're not going to interfere. It's just not going to happen. They will interfere, and they will maintain their own interests for the betterment of their interests, to project their own power in every which way, to undermine their opponents.
So expecting a long-term solution as far as peace is concerned is just like a dream then.
But you need all the parties involved. You see, if Pakistan complains that India shouldn't be involved, well, Pakistan then, has just undermined the peace process, primarily because India is involved, and India must make a stance and say, well, we don't want to be involved anymore, but we don't want to be involved only.
But they are not a part of the solution, unfortunately, sir.
Well,
this is not what we claim. This is what a lot of other analysts also say, that they are a part of the problem. Because the kind of stakes Ashraf Ghani, or for that matter in particular Abdullah has in India, the kind of properties they have made there, their bank accounts, their money, their families, everybody, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
can't disagree.
How can you undermine India then?
But I also say Iran is part of the problem. Uzbekistan is part of the problem. Yeah?
Because everybody's guarding their own interests.
Saudi is part of the problem in this respect and what they've done to create such a mess in that country. Yeah? What about all these other countries? Everybody's been involved in this one way or another. And so we have to come to that realization that you can't take anybody away. You have to come to some form of regional understanding. You know, because this is a regional matter. It filters out. The mess in Afghanistan filters out everywhere else and can cause problems everywhere else. And it's
Dr.
going to
Saab,
happen
you just mentioned, I mean, since there are so many adversaries, Pakistan doesn't get along with India, India has a problem with China, I mean, you know,
It's all
but China is close to Pakistan, China is investing in Iran. I mean, so, you know, when you talk about the money factor, the investment factor, as Commodore Saab mentioned, and so many other aspects. So China suits them because it's a regional power also. America is far away. But sir, having said that, Pakistan is also making a lot of effort. I mean, our special envoy to Afghanistan, Mr. Mohammad Sadiq, who's a brilliant person, sir. I think he is the man, you know, man to watch. Perhaps, you know, he was all around. He was in Iran. He met the foreign minister, Mr. Jawad Zarif, there. So you think Pakistan can bring Iran, you know, close to Pakistan as far as the philosophy of Pakistan is concerned, or do you think they will be in the Indian camp?
For Iran.
Yeah, because, you know, for two reasons. One, this P5+1 renegotiation, Biden coming into power, Biden being, as a Democrat, this close to the Indians, and Iran really needs some sort of removal, you know, as far as those sanctions are concerned. Don't you think, I mean, Iran would show its inclination towards India plus USA, you know, and they might, you know, give up on certain accounts as well, as far as the peace process is concerned.
I don't doubt that. I think Iran is very pragmatic in this respect. It needs to look at its own future. Its economy is suffering massively because of the sanctions, and it wants to move forward. It wants to be part of the community again, and there's an option forward for that. But it's going to take time. They don't trust the Americans anymore. I mean, that's obvious. Trump being what he was, threw away the deal. So when it's done once, it's, you know, once bitten, twice shy. It's going to happen, and they're going to be very careful. You've got to also look at the history in this region, and where Iran played its part, supporting certain parties as opposed to others, and had very significant links with those. They're not going to stop. They're going to continue to support them one way or another. In that respect, it may undermine the Taliban. It may, because they'll be supporting the Hazaras, where predominantly are Shia, which is a state religion in Iran anyway. So they're going to have that family link, you could say. So they're going to continue that. And whatever's in that, their interest is also a religious matter. So that's very important for them as well. It's less rational in that respect. It's more ideological. Yeah? As far as India is concerned, India's behavior in Kashmir isn't very good. But then nobody's really talked about that anywhere because they're looking at their own.
It doesn't matter to them.
It doesn't matter to them at the end of the day. So they're going to look at their own interests and what they can get out of it. Every country has done this and will continue to do this.
Absolutely.
It's not about transactional relationships. That's the way it has always been. So there's no point hue and cry, no point crying and
even
arguing
when you
and
talk
shouting
about the
this.
strategic interest or
This is
strategic
just the way the world works.
alliances, I mean, obviously,
You have to be
the other factor
cool-headed
is always there.
and very cold and calculating in the way you act and behave towards others.
All right,
That's just the way the Machiavellian world actually is.
All right. So last quick comment before we wrap up, and that is about the current role of Qatar, sir. We do understand that Qatar has played a very good role, you know, providing them a place, a space, even to open up the Emirates of Afghanistan. But the point is, sir, now, I fail to understand, is Qatar still in the Iranian camp? Or during the latest development when they were called, and Mohammed bin Salman, for some rhyme reason, sir, was a very different man, because earlier he had put 10 points, which were not at all acceptable to anyone, I would say. But he rolled back, sir, and then we saw things sorted out. Sir.
Qatar, so far, I would say that yes, it's not like back to normal setup of the Gulf, it continues to be like different, like it shifted to an extent towards the Iranian camp, and to my assessment it continues to be so, and it will take some time when the whole thing gets finalized in the region. That is the time that we will be able to say it for sure that how exactly the whole thing comes out.
All right, sir. Anyway, thank you so much, Air Commodore Saab. It was a pleasure having you, Dr. AQAB.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.